Hello plant lovers and welcome to this special edition which is all about Australian native dendrobiums, the Dendrobium Kingianum. Now this one, as you can see, is in bloom and it's so massive that I might take some shots of it in the garden. But here we are, it is mid-spring in Australia and the Australian dendrobiums are all in bloom and the fragrance is divine. There's a little magenta one you can just see there. I thought I'd share with you some growing tips because they're really easy, and depending where you are, if you can get hold of them, you should give them a good Aussie go. Okay, first up, geographical positioning. I am in Melbourne, which is a temperate climate, sort of equivalent to a zone 10 in the US and parts of southeast England. So we have cold, wet winters which don't freeze and warm, dry summers which can have extreme heat. The Dendrobium Kingianum are native to the east coast of Australia, so actually not the state that I'm in, but New South Wales and Queensland, so where Sydney and Brisbane are, further up the coast. However, they do extremely well here in Melbourne outside. So let's go to some basics. Firstly, they are epiphytes and lithophytes. They often live in crevices in trees and in rotting trunks, but they also can live on rocky outcrops in crevices there. So that gives you a good indication of the type of conditions to replicate if you're trying to grow them at home. Right, so where to begin? First thing is, yes, it's a dendrobium. Yes, they do have some characteristics of other dendrobiums, but they also have some quirky differences. So let's start with the first thing. So they have canes like other dendrobiums. They are not deciduous, so no leaves are going to be dropping, and they don't really have a rest period. So if you imagine in Australia, the summers are fairly dry and fairly sunny and warm. That will be the period when they have less water, and in winter they tend to have more water. However, if you're growing them at home, it's important not to overwater them. So as a general rule, I would say err on the drier side rather than the wetter side. As you can see, the flowers appear at the end of each cane, and each flower spike can have many blooms, and they are all fragrant. Now these are species Kingianum, so they're not particularly special in terms of colour. They tend to vary from almost white, very pale pink white, to very deep magenta, and everything in between. Back to the canes. Okay, so the canes aren't deciduous and they will last quite a few years, and you'll see when it actually does die down, it looks dead. So unlike a deciduous dendrobium where you want to leave those canes, when these drop their leaves and look dead, they are, so you can trim them. They're very vigorous growers, and so like most dendrobiums, they kind of want to be pot bound. You can really leave them in there until the canes are literally bursting at the seams. Again, I have mine in terracotta pots because I am a terracotta pot kind of guy. They don't really have a rest season, as I said, but in terms of watering generally, err on the side of dryness. When you do water it, maybe give it a good drench and then let it dry out reasonably. Now, to be honest, because I'm lucky / blessed and living in Melbourne, I leave these outside. They grow outside all year for me, and I can be pretty harsh. If I go on holiday, for example, I just leave them. They just have to fend for themselves. So in the right sort of environment, you don't really have to be super fussy. If they have a dry period for 2 or 3 weeks, they're not going to turn tail and die on you. So don't be too concerned about that. I think out of any orchid I've ever grown, these are so tough. They are so easy. A bit like epidendrums, you kind of can't kill them. Well, you can obviously, but we'll get to that. Okay, so watering. Yes, they like to err on the drier side. When you do water them, give them a good drench, let them dry out. Light. Now, like all dendrobiums, they do need winter sun, and this has been my problem. I'm in a rental while we're renovating our house, and I just don't have enough space to give all of these winter sun, which is unfortunate. So I don't have a really great array of flowers. Now, this magenta one, which is just on the turn, unfortunately, usually you would get a flower spike from every single cane, and they're covered in flowers. It's a massive colour and fragrance, and they're beautiful. But unfortunately, I just wasn't able to give this enough winter light. So it's only got 1, 2, 3, 4 flower spikes, which is a shame. This one, however, I was able to give plenty of winter light to, and it's done pretty well. However, they do like a lot of winter sun. But, and here's the caveat, as it starts to get warmer, they don't like direct afternoon sun. You can burn the leaves. And I think somewhere on here you can see sunburn from a previous incarnation. So in winter, direct morning light is great, and then dappled light. And in summer, dappled light is great. I grow these outdoors, and so basically under a tree is the perfect spot. The sun is lower in winter, you get lots of light penetration. The sun is higher in summer and you get the shade from the tree. And they just love that. They also get a little bit protected from the rain because in winter, if there is heavy rainfall, you don't want them to get that wet. So if you were growing these at home, I would suggest that you need to find somewhere where they get a chill and winter light. And then in summer, they just need filtered light. In terms of humidity, you really don't need to worry about this. Mine are outside in Melbourne. Melbourne is not a humid environment. It is temperate, so not humid at all. And yet they're native to parts of New South Wales and Queensland, which can be very humid. So they're pretty tough. And I think they do adapt to the surroundings that you've got them in. Temperature. Now, they are pretty tough, pretty hardy, and they grow in quite a few elevations. So they can take cold, but they can't take continuous cold and wet and frosts. In Melbourne, we don't really get below 0 degrees centigrade, 32 Fahrenheit. Very often, if ever, we can get cold winter nights down to 1 or 5 degrees Celsius, which is about 35 degrees Fahrenheit. And they'll be fine with that, but not if it's consistent. So again, I know it's really tricky, but you've got to figure out what your local environment is to see if they're going to survive. So I would say if you have long, cold, wet winters, don't risk it outside. But if you're in a climate that's similar to Melbourne or other parts of Eastern Australia, so the winters aren't freezing, you could give it a go outside. So the other thing about temperature is they do need the winter chill to stimulate the flowers, like many other dendrobiums. And then in summer, they're pretty hardy, they're pretty tough. This big boy used to live on my balcony in the inner city, and we would sometimes have 40 degrees Celsius plus days. In fact, we do every summer, and these things are as tough as nuts. So that is what? That is 105 Fahrenheit, way over 100. They're tough. The only thing is, protect them from direct afternoon sun in summer because they will get burnt. They won't die, but they'll get burnt. And because the canes last for so many years, you're going to get your sunburn, which this leaf has, reminding you of how cruel a parent you have been for a very long time. Fertilizer, a little often. I use a diluted solution of a seaweed generic fertilizer every now and then. Again, they're super tough. I leave them outside. I give them a splosh if I remember, so don't get hung up about it. In spring, not a bad idea to sprinkle a little slow release fertilizer, not too much because you don't want to burn the roots, so just a little bit, which is just a general pick-me-up and a general tonic, but they're so tough, they can survive anything. And the last point is the potting media, exactly the same as any other orchid. Loose, fast draining, so you can use a generic orchid mix, you can mix that with perlite, you can mix that with charcoal if you want. So as long as it's free draining, just don't plant them in regular potting mix because they're just not going to thrive. If you imagine where they're living in quite contained areas, either in rocks or the forks of branches, and their roots are clinging to all the accumulated matter in there. So it's very loose and very free draining, which is the key, again, to when you're watering it. Give it a good drench and then leave it. Try and replicate its natural environment. There you go. You can grow them indoors as long as you A, give them a winter chill, and B, give them winter direct sunlight, and you'll be fine. And then for the rest of the year, they can just take dappled light. Pretty tough. There we go, Australian Dendrobium Kingianum, which was named after an early Australian navigator who was weirdly born on Norfolk Island in the 19th century. I don't know why they were named after him, Mr. King. I couldn't find out whether or not he was a botanist. Anyway, they've been named after him. The other thing is that these are all species, so they're beautiful flowers, but quite simple. Like many Australian orchids in the last 10 years or so, there have been amazing advances in hybridization. So you can find amazing colors, amazing larger flowers, different shapes, different forms, different cane formations, speckles, all manner of colors and spots. They're really quite amazing. And this one here, which I'm going to show you, which is very heavy. Ta-da! The flowers have just gone over on this one, but this is a hybrid with the most pretty speckled flowers, which I'll show you in some more footage I took when it was in bloom. Again, it didn't have the optimum winter space, so it didn't flower that well for me, unfortunately, but it will next year when it's got some more targeted love. The only drawback I would say with these orchids is that the flowers are beautiful and they smell heavenly, but they don't last that long. So what I would do is get as many as you can because they do tend to flower over a period of weeks. So each flower head is probably going to last a week to 10 days if you're lucky, which is unfortunate, maybe a little bit longer. But if you get a few different colors, you'll tend to find that the flowers are going to open at different points. So you might get a month's worth of blooming out of the 3 or 4 specimens that you've got. And they do make great specimens. They're incredibly vigorous. They'll fill the pots really quickly. They'll send up 2, 3, 4 canes a year. So it's not going to take you long to fill the pot, and each cane will flower if you give them the right conditions. So you will very quickly have an amazing display. And like other dendrobiums, if they are stressed, they will produce keikis at the end of the cane. Super easy to grow. These are some that I literally just shoved in a pot with some orchid media, and look, there's a little flower on that one. So they're really easy to propagate. But if you're getting keikis, it means they're probably not getting enough sun and they're getting too much water. So you kind of almost don't want that. But should you get that, they are easy to propagate. But as they are so vigorous, you will very quickly get a massive plant. And because they're so tough, you can just hack it in half, split it up, and share the bounty with your family and friends. There we are, plant lovers. Australian Dendrobiums. Dendrobium Kingianum 101. A very easy, very tough orchid to grow. Great for beginners because you can abandon it, you can go on holiday, you can forget to water it, you can forget to feed it, and it's going to be fine. It just doesn't want to freeze, and it doesn't want to be wet all the time. Anyway, there you go. If you have any questions, do feel free to let me know. This is totally based on my own experience growing these here in Melbourne. So yes, hit like if you'd like, hit subscribe if you'd like, ask me a question. I am a rank amateur, but this is based on my experience. I can perhaps help you. And in the meantime, I will see you next week. So until then, plant lovers, see you next week.